She is best known for her roles in 1981's Academy Award-winning Chariots of Fire as Sybil Gordon. She was in Ghost Story with Fred Astaire, perhaps best known to a lot of Trekkies as the Borg Queen. She was in Solomon Kane. She had a brief part in Thor: The Dark World. And
Seriously brief, right?
And she's also been in Sleepwalkers, the supernatural thriller She Will. This is her second time in the Motor City in almost 3 decades. This is her debut at Motor City Nightmares. So please, Detroit, show her some love.
Thank you for coming.
Oh no, I don't want to steal anyone's thunder. I'm just.
You got questions that you want to ask or anything like that?
I will happily narrow the aisle.
Thank you very much. Now,
No, definitely. So, you guys, are you a pass holder? Is that?
I interviewed this young woman for the Open Press prior to her arrival.
Wonderful. So I didn't know we were having, a special guest here today. So very nice. So, round of applause. So, let's open up the floor real quick to anybody that has any quick questions for the queen of horror sci-fi. All right. Love your work, by the way. Any questions?
Out of all your horror sci-fi roles, what's your favorite one?
It's a question I can never answer. Every role kind of requires you to stand in that character's shoes and to find a part of yourself in the character. So I have an affection for every role I've played, except, and I have to say, Christabella.
Silent Hill.
Silent Hill. That was darker than I wanted to get. But I had said yes, so you can't stop halfway. You've just got to go there. But that was a journey into the heart of darkness.
I imagine that. The video game even scared me. So, but with that being said, hours and hours of makeup time then. It's like, how long have you been in the chair?
Not for Christabella, but I've done a bunch of roles that I've spent a lot of time in makeup. The Borg Queen took 7 hours to put on the hair and the makeup, and an hour to get into the suit, and then 2 hours to get out of it.
That's why they pay the big bucks, right?
But to tell the truth, I always describe it as a collaborative performance, like the ultimate collaboration, because if you think about it, I couldn't have rocked up on set and been the Borg Queen. She was the Borg Queen. And by the time all of that was on, I felt as if she'd checked in and I was just the vessel. There was a wonderful, wonderful moment. We had tried, we'd put on the head, we'd done various experiments with it. We had tried the suit in various, like an arm and a leg and the torso, and then it all got sort of fitted onto a mesh, and they assembled the whole thing. I was prepared, as it were, in a tiny little trailer, all of my own, because we started the first day we started at 2 o'clock in the morning. No, 3. I left home at 2. We started at 3. And after that, we worked on like an 18 hours on, 9 hours off. So we started at whatever time it was that was 18 plus 9. So sometimes it was at 11 o'clock in the morning, sometimes it was at 3 in the afternoon. But that went on for 14 days. Anyway, so I was in my own little trailer. And we put me all together. And then they took me to the big trailer where Patrick and Brent and everyone else was, to call the producers and have them come and look at the Borg Queen. And it was a wonderful experience because the trailer had mirrors for, not the ceiling, but 4 walls of mirror. And they said, well, should we put in the lenses while we wait? And so, yeah, I couldn't put them in myself because of I had Borg hats on. Someone put them in, and they were all standing behind me. And I looked up, I kind of blinked to settle the lenses, and I looked up, and everyone behind me, reflected in the mirror, went, and I thought, yes. She's there, she's arrived. So they gave me this amazing gift of the look, which was really kind of extraordinary. And an interesting thing happened with the suit, because it was made of rubber. Now, the first one was made of rubber. Usually, rubber, when they cure it, doesn't shrink. But my suit shrank. Oh, no. So the first day, we started at 2 in the morning. And I had coffee and water and juice. And that kind of went on until I went onto the set. And by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had to go to the bathroom. Now, what they did was to sew me into the suit, and then there was a flap that went over the stitches, and that got glued down so that it was completely invisible. And the first assistant director said, "Do you really have to go to the bathroom?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So 45 minutes later, that was the most expensive pee in the history. Anyway, so what happened was that the suit had shrunk and they couldn't get me back into it. Because my hands and feet had swollen, because the circulation was so. So that night, Todd Masters, because that was a Friday night into a Saturday morning, and he drove across the valley and spent the weekend making me a new suit, and it was soft foam. So I was so comfortable. The poor Borg, my poor Borg, I also had, from that first day, blisters at my wrist, my neck, my armpits, and my ankles, where the edge of the suit. But I was fine, mine healed up, but the poor Borg were in agony through the shoot. But just talking about the gifts that I was given by Scott and Todd. So the suit, we only realized that my hands and feet were going to swell when I had worn it for like 18 hours. But when we tried it out, because it was too tight, it was really kind of hard to walk in it. And so that kind of gait of hers that was like this was because it was so hard to walk in the suit. But they gave me a very distinctive kind of movement, which I obviously went on doing after I was in my marshmallow wrap, which was my second suit.
Wow.
That's a very long answer to your question.
Quick question about that then. In the movie, can you tell which scenes were shot with the original suit and which ones weren't?
I don't think so, because I had what I called a team of Borg wranglers because there was someone who looked after my hands and my feet, and there was someone who looked after my battery packs because of all of those little flashing lights, and then there was someone with a pot of glue to glue together the sort of fractures in the suit that just came from wear and tear. And there was someone who looked after my contact lenses. And there was Scott who looked after my face, or I should say her face. And then there was someone with an enormous tube of KY jelly. And a sponge.
That makes sense.
And that was what gave her that glossy look. And so I think the gloss kind of disguised the fact that it was no longer the rubber suit, but the foam suit.
Okay, let me ask you this. Did you have to shave your head or for that part?
Shave it.
Did you shave your head?
No.
Okay.
They wrapped my hair around my head, and then they sprayed on something called Gaffquat, which is concentrated hairspray. So it sets rock solid. It was like having a saucepan on your head, and then the head went over.
Sorry, I was just like, I know how you feel. Sorry.
You've got Gaffquat.
You know what, anything that'll keep it going, you know.
I can recommend Gaffquat. It washes out in the shower.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, you know what? Sir,
Who was your favorite Captain Plagueis? Talk.
You know, they were both great. They were both completely different. When I came back to do the finale of Voyager, I was very nervous because I thought it's not a big screen anymore. It's a little television screen. And will it work? Will she be there? And that was my principal worry.
Yeah.
And then the day before I was about to shoot, I suddenly thought, oh my goodness, it's 2 women, not 2 men. And I thought, but she was so kind of sexual, and she used that. And I called the producer and I said, well, now what? It's 2 women. And he said, think of her as omnisexual. Okay. And after it was over, I thought, what is omnisexual?
They just told you something.
But it was just, she was just as manipulative as she ever was. So, but they were fabulous. Because it was literally, again, 2 days of sort of 18 hours of work, 9 hours off, and then another 18 hours. And I got on a plane that night and went to do something else in the United Kingdom. So it was just like a dream, really. But they were fabulous to work with. As were, you know, Brent and Jonathan and Patrick. I only met everyone else when we did the press tour, and that was a blast.
Now that's one of my favorite season finales of an episode of the series. The end of that show, beautifully done.
Great, thank you.
That's a good question from you.
I was told I have to ask you about, I'm going to take it back to horror for a minute, back to Ghost Story.
Yeah. What
You tell the story about Melvin Douglas leaving the set every day and something about hand gestures.
This is in the movie Ghost Story. As Kurt said, I had the extraordinary privilege as a brand new actor to work with these remarkable people. They were gallant and funny and polite. They were considerate of everyone, no matter how lowly you were in the hierarchy. You don't have to go. I don't mind if she's talking. No, seriously. They were the epitome of professionalism, and they were just amazing, magnificent. But I had, there was, I actually worked with them very little. In fact, I didn't really interact with them. John Irvin did something very sweet. We had a week of rehearsal. And on the very last afternoon, he said, okay, this afternoon, Fred and Douglas and Melvin and John Houseman, we're all going to sit around the table and you're going to read their young roles. So they read themselves as young men. So I got to actually do the film with them as a table read, which was fabulous. But anyway, for the first 3 weeks, I didn't work at all because it was freezing. It was 32 below, but we didn't have any snow. No snow. And we needed snow. So they shot all the interiors, and I was just sitting in my hotel room because you couldn't go outside. And John Irvin said, well, why don't you go down to Manhattan? There's an exhibition of the Expressionists. And I think you should go look at that. It'll be helpful. And so I was waiting on a Saturday morning in the lobby to catch the what's it called? It's not the Leopard. What's it called? The bus?
Greyhound.
The Greyhound. The Greyhound. Sorry, in South Africa it's called the Leopard. The Greyhound. So I was waiting to catch the Greyhound, to go get a cab to catch the Greyhound. And Melvin and Douglas came down and he said, well, what are you doing down here? And I said, well, I'm going to catch the Greyhound to New York. And he said, oh, I'm going home for the weekend. Come in my limo. So I went in his limo. And when we got to Riverside Drive, which was where his apartment was, the driver stayed with the car and I helped Melvin carry his bags up to his apartment. What was the name of his wife? She was a politician, a very famous politician. Helen was her Christian name.
Jeez.
Anyway, so we get to the front door and she had died recently. And he unlocked the door and the door swung open. And as he stepped into the hallway, he reached out and he just stroked a bust of Helen, her head. And he said, that's my head. It was just the most moving, it was just a gesture of such sweetness. He was fabulous. He had had a heart attack that summer, and so he couldn't walk upstairs. But for whatever reason, they had a scene with him that they were determined to shoot on the first floor. And they didn't quite know how to get him up the stairs. And he said, oh, I've got a solution. So put an armchair in a pickup, in a forklift, and you can just forklift me up to the first floor window. So he was not well, and he was not young. But he sat in this armchair, and he climbed through the window, and he did the scene, and he got back out, and they brought him down again. But he was so charming about it. They were astonishing. They were wonderful.
That is awesome. Thank you. That was a few more questions. Anybody? Borg Queen, sci-fi horror.
You, sir.
If there were any filmmakers you had the chance to work with, who would you pick?
Tommy Brunswick.
Who's that?
She's the owner of Motor City Nightmare.
No, there are so many. I don't know, Scorsese, they go on and on. There are so many amazing filmmakers with such individual visions. I'm just happy to work, frankly. But it's a very interesting job to do because you quite simply have to show up and make yourself totally vulnerable and available because it's all about the exchange. It's all about what you give to each other. in terms of what happens in that creative space. And everyone comes with the best they have to offer, because you kind of depend on each other for it to work. But Kurt, you had a question, which was?
I wanted to ask you, talk a little bit about, well, two things. With First Contact, talk about how you had to audition. Tell that story that you told me, where you only had a partial script, not even that, a few scenes, and you thought you had blown the audition. And talk about working with Fred Astaire. You had a beautiful story about Fred.
So the I was sent the Star Trek scenes, 3 scenes. She only really is in 3 scenes, which is interesting. I don't think they had any idea how iconic the role would become. That essentially they had written an archetype, sort of that was part of our collective unconscious. This terrifying female.
She was evil.
No, she wasn't evil. You can't say the Borg Queen was evil. You can't say that to me.
She was misunderstood.
And how would you feel as the worst person?
So they sent me these 3 scenes, and I had never watched Star Trek because I kind of grew up without television. Where I grew up, there was no television. So I had never watched Star Trek. I'd heard about Beam Me Up, Scotty, and I thought that was a very good idea, but I hadn't watched the series. Anyway, I look at the 3 scenes and I say, well, this looks very interesting, but can I please have the script? If they want me to do a good job, I need to read. And she said, no, you don't understand. No one sees the script. If you want to be considered, you've just got to go there and do it. So I went, and I had prepared the scenes in the way that I always do. But a very curious thing happened when I got up and did the scenes for Junie Lowry, the casting director, and Jonathan. As I was doing them, I thought to myself, I have to play this role. I just, wow. Anyway, they said thank you very much, as they do, and I left the room and I ran off the lot. I found my car. It was before the time of cell phones, so I drove around looking for a payphone. I found one in a gas station, and I called my agent and I said, I blew that, but I really want to play the role. Will you ask them? Will you beg them to have me back, and I'll try and do better? I suppose she made the call, I don't know. 3 weeks passed, and I had reached the point where I thought, oh well, another one bites the dust. And then they called, and they said, would you please come back and do it again? And so I went back, and I don't know whether I did anything different, but I did the 3 scenes. And as I left the room, they called and offered the role. So it was I was very happy that they did.
Yes, of
And apropos Fred Astaire, he just more about how quite remarkable they were. The day before we started filming, his sister Adele died, and he was extremely close to her. And so he was 83, and to have your sister die when you're 83, I think is a very kind of big deal. And John Irvin called the company together and said, Mr. Astaire's sister has died, and he will not work tomorrow. But the next day, after he had a day by himself, he came out onto set and he shot the movie. which I thought showed enormous fortitude. And there's that, if anyone has seen the movie, there's a sequence where my character appears as an apparition in a snowy forest track, and he's driving an old car, and she suddenly materializes in front of him, and the car flips over, and his character crawls out into the snow on his hands and knees. And that was Fred Astaire. It was like 30 degrees below. And he went out on his hands and knees several times, I would imagine, because you don't shoot something like that in one take. They were very special. But the question that you asked me on the side was about the moment when the Borg Queen comes down. I mean, does anyone want to know about that?
Oh, yeah. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here.
So what they did was they glued the neck piece, that spine, to my neck, and they put me flat on my tummy on a kind of cradle that was attached to a crane, and they fastened me to the cradle. I can't remember how. And then they wrapped me in blue screen cloth, and they took me about 30 feet up into the air. And there was a motion control camera head. And what that means is the camera has a chip that remembers exactly what its pathway was down to X marks the spot. And so the camera brings me down, and I'm saying those lines, and it deposits me more or less on the X. And then they take all of that out, and the camera just repeats the move on an empty set. And they marry the two together in the computer. But I had to redo all of the sound because there was so much in the studio afterwards. There was so much kind of heavy machinery whenever the Borg Queen was on the set. So I go in to the first ADR session, and we see this section. And what happened was they had told me this was going to be the most fabulous entrance of all time. So that I'm watching the film, and the head comes down here, and the body is there, and it goes, and I thought, that's not quite what it's meant to be. But I didn't say anything. I thought, just keep your big mouth closed. And I come back, and the next time, the same thing happens. It goes, I didn't say anything. And then I saw it at the press screening, and there it was, fabulous. And I said, what happened? And they said, a couple of IT guys spent a month making that work in the computer. You know, just, I suppose, dealing with the programs and the graphics and the whatnot. But it was a pretty astonishing moment, I think.
It truly was.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That really is. Now, again, would you go through all that again for us if we asked you to? Yeah, you would continue to go to Borg Queen if you had the opportunity?
I reckon so, because each time I've gone back, she kind of gets more and more interesting as an entity. I mean, they think they can get rid of her. Well, I've got news for them. She's out there.
Reincarnates.
That is awesome. So you're in the back?
Yeah. You know, I know you from Star Trek, a big Star Trek fan. Other people here may know you more from horror movies. What's something that you've done that a lot of people don't know that you wish did?
Wish they did.
Yes.
Well, I suppose it all...
Like a deep cut or something.
I guess it depends on your taste in movies, but I did a picture once that I love, just because of what it is. It's a very, very simple storyline. It's black and white, and it's called The Institute Menumenta, or This Dream That People Call Life. It's just a very simple story, but it's kind of film as in poetry, as opposed to film as in prose. It's just about how the images are juxtaposed. It was made by a pair of identical twins, and that was an experience in itself. And I made a movie, in fact, it was the first thing that I produced, called Jail Caesar, and it was my husband's movie, and we shot in 3 different prisons, in one Drumheller Penitentiary in Canada, and Cardiff Prison in Wales, and Portsmouth Prison in South Africa, and it was about the adolescence of Julius Caesar, and it was of great interest to my husband. He was researching something else in the British Library, and he came upon this statement about Julius Caesar, that until he was 30, he was considered to be, he was in debt. He was bisexual in a very stoic heterosexual Rome. I mean, at that point in Roman history, it was completely unacceptable to be heterosexual, I mean to be bisexual, but he was. He was adored by both men and women. So he was desperately in debt, always. He was just a waste of space as far as his elders were concerned. And yet he goes on to become one of the icons of history. And Paul just wondered what that journey was. But there was very little written about it. So he started to read people like Pliny and Suetonius, and he pieced together this adolescence and how Caesar becomes Caesar. But he didn't want to do it with togas. And he thought to himself, so many people who are put in prison for whatever reason are as fueled by hopes and dreams as anyone else. And yet they're kind of locked up and considered to be the lowest of the low. And so he thought people inside prisons would understand what made this man. It's, you know, it's the kind of creative jump that some people like my husband make. So we spent years working in prisons, running acting and writing workshops, and amazing stuff came out of that process. And eventually we made the movie. And it's a very unusual piece of work, but it's also an interesting piece of work called Jail Caesar. I don't know, there's a bunch of interesting stuff that I mean. I actually was in a and it's a very odd movie called The Twilight of the Ice Nymphs. But I went from making Star Trek First Contact. We finished on the 3rd of July because we had to stop for the 4th of July weekend, and then they were starting the series on the Tuesday. So we had to finish. And I got on a plane on the 4th of July and flew to Winnipeg to work with a surrealist, a guy called Guy Madden. I don't know if you've heard of him. Careful, Gimli Hospital. So I worked with Guy. And there was so little money for this movie that we worked part-time because all his friends were helping him, and they had to do their jobs in the morning, and then in the afternoon and the evening we shot. And we shot in a soap factory. And they were making soap over here, and he was shooting in the other part of the factory. And the factory was in a train yard. So they were shunting trains outside, making soap next door. We shot this weird, surreal little movie inside this warehouse. And we only recorded sound as a guide track, so I had to go back and loop the whole movie. But it's like a fever dream. It's like not exactly a nightmare, but they say in the land of the midnight sun, you know, and in the northern parts of Canada where it doesn't get dark at night, they have what they call fever dreams, and that's what Twilight of the Ice Nymphs is. Yeah. So I've done some really wild, kind of unusual stuff, but it's all part of the richness of the journey.
Right. Who have been your favorite directors, producers to work with through your career?
I loved working with Jonathan Frakes. I loved working with Mick Garris, who did Sleepwalkers. John Owen, who did Ghost Story. The lady who directed a movie that I was in just before the pandemic hit, that we shot in Scotland, and it came out on the 15th of July, so it's available. It's called She Will. Charlotte is, she's a very unusual and established fine artist. So she paints, she does photography and painting and sculpture. She mixes it all up. Anyway, this is her first movie, and she was fabulous to work with. I've worked with a lot of very interesting people. I've forgotten his name, forgive me, I'm very bad with names, but the guy who directed Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Oh, goodness.
John.
Oh my God.
But he was lovely.
Everything's falling out of my brain.
He was very, very empathetic. You know, mostly you work with people who care about the process, or they wouldn't be there. It's too difficult to do it for fun, or because it's just a job.
If I may say so about the movie She Will, she is co-starring with fellow Trek villain Malcolm McDowell. If you didn't know that, so it is being loosely pigeonholed as horror, but it is not that.
It's more like there's this new kind of emerging subgenre, which someone told me yesterday at my table is being called folk horror. So it's more like a fairy tale or a folk tale. So that it's not Chainsaw Massacre and that bus scene. It's much more about internal sort of landscape that's kind of horrifying.
More like a psychological thriller.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that Gretel and Hansel would fall into folk, and I guess She would, because Charlotte, the director, describes it as a fairy tale, a dark fairy tale.
Well, it actually is folklore.
I beg your
I
pardon?
mean, it is folklore. I mean, that's 3
Right.
centuries old.
Yes, I think it's a really good way of describing it, because I think with Gretel and Hansel, because they sold it so hard as horror, I think they make a big mistake, because they lose people who don't want Chainsaw Massacre, and they really irritate people who do, because there's no blood, there's no gore or to speak of. It's a much more internal thing, and that's not what they were wanting or expecting. But Malcolm in She Will does a beautiful performance. It is an actor of the highest order, taking material that is, the character was not fully written. I mean, there was a huge potential, but there was stuff, it was sketched in the script. And he actually brings to it an inner life that is, I found when I saw it, because I wasn't on set when they shot that moment, but there's a moment when he's by himself and he puts his head in his hands. And I don't want to do a spoiler, but that moment was not written, and I don't think Charlotte asked for it, but it gives the character a resonance that is unexpected, and just a wonderful actor at work. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well,
And he's such a cool guy, I have to tell you. So I grew up in South Africa, am I running over time? Is there some,
No, I was just gonna ask questions. I do have a comment. You can take your time. You're
So I grew up in South Africa, and as I said, we didn't have it was a very repressed society, or oppressed, depending on what color your skin was. We didn't have television. They censored the movies that would be shown. They censored a lot of books. So when I was 17, just before I went to university, my great aunt died, and she left my mother a small sum of money. And my mother decided that she would take us all overseas, right? The overseas holiday, because my eldest brother was about to he had qualified as a doctor. My other brother was going to med school, and she said, we'll never have a family holiday again. You know, we'll meet for Christmas, but we won't go away together. So we came overseas. And somehow or other, I wound up being the last person. They'd all gone home, and I was staying with some friends of my parents. And I wound up going to see Clockwork Orange.
That's a lightning bolt.
Well, yes. When the movie was over, I was like this. It was, the ushers came to find out if I was okay. I couldn't get up. My legs wouldn't work. Anyway, so Malcolm gets cast in She Will. And he's in the trailer. And I was at the door. And I was so nervous, because that's my first impression of
How old
Malcolm.
were you when you see that movie?
17.
17.
So now, more years than I care to enumerate.
But you've seen the movie.
We tiptoe around those questions. Okay, we tiptoe around those questions, but.
So I'm standing outside the trailer, and I think, my heart is beating so hard that I can't quite hear what I'm thinking. Anyway, I have to go in, because I have to go and sit down in the makeup chair. And I walk into the trailer, and Malcolm sees me in the mirror, and he says, Alice! And he gets, I've never met him, he gets up and he flings his arms around me. I nearly died.
Wow.
He is funny and sweet, and the amazing thing about him is that he is totally outspoken. Totally outspoken. He says what comes into his head. But he's got such a twinkle that if I said what he says, I'd just be plain obnoxious. But Malcolm makes you kind of drool. I don't know. If you ever get the chance to meet him or sit when he's doing a panel as a member of the audience, go listen, because he's utterly captivating.
He sat right there a year ago.
Did he really?
Yeah.
And did you feel the same about it?
Well, unfortunately, this is my first time,
Oh,
so
okay.
hopefully I'm doing okay for you guys.
Yes,
I mean, geez,
He
but-
had some stitches.
Yes, he had us in stitches. He was
Did he
funny.
really?
Oh,
Yeah.
wax or-
Well, he was like only on the set for 3 or 4 days, and we were in gales of laughter whenever the camera was not rolling. Because he's an entertainer. I mean, absolutely.
True professional. He
Yeah.
really is. He really
Yeah.
is. Just like you.
Well,
I can't thank you enough. Just being here is a tremendous honor for me. So thank you.
For us all.
Stories, for
no,
everything.
it's a joy.
I mean, I have a ton of questions, but truly, we just wanted to make sure that you knew that Tommy Brunswick, owner of Motor City Nightmares, is your biggest fan. And she is so busy right now, but I wanted to relay that message.
Thank you.
And, you know, if there's anything you need, we're definitely going to take care of you.
Good.
I can't thank you enough for all this. Yeah.
No, but I want to thank you for watching movies. Thank you. Because without you, we'd be just out there on our own, and there wouldn't be any point, would there? So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Let's give it one more.
Yes.